And we are live. Welcome to the NFL Strategy Show Recap Edition. It is Monday, September 27th. I am Josh Engleman. I am joined by Adam Scherer. We are here to just take a look back at Sunday in the NFL. Normally, this is a time where we're usually just pretty grumpy because it's the NFL and you could win 1 week out of 17 and for 16 weeks out of the year, you're just not all that happy. Well, today is one of those weeks. Adam, I'd ask how you're doing, but I know how you're doing. You had a very good day yesterday. Yeah,
yesterday went pretty well for me. So in a little bit better mood for the show than normally am. I'll let you be the grumpy one since you lost again. But
I certainly did. Yeah. In the best tournament you can get into too. That's the best.
But yeah, pretty good day for me. Got third on Yahoo, got second on DraftKings. So yesterday was fun.
So we're going to dig into the slant on DraftKings. That is the tournament that you finished second in. We can touch on your Yahoo lineup too if we need to. Either way, great showing for you across both sites. Very nice rebound for you and had to feel pretty darn good. Boosts you up heading into week 4 for next week. Oh, how did Showdown shake out last night?
Made like 1,000.
Oh, okay. So just all out total Sunday victory. Yeah. Did you jam into anything else for Showdown?
No, I played what I had planned on playing, so that was good. But yeah,
I was waiting for I got into the Showdown Thunderdome or something.
Yeah,
like that.
No. I stuck to what I was going to play anyway. But made money at cash yesterday on FanDuel and DraftKings too. It was just an overall good day for me.
Well, I'm happy for you. As much as I like to joke around, when push comes to shove, seeing you win 50K plus or something along those lines is pretty awesome to see. So kudos to you for that one. We're going to dig into all of it. We got a lot to talk about for it. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, all that good stuff. We're going to talk about the slate in its entirety. We're going to start it off with just taking a look at who some of the chalkier plays of the slate were. And it honestly wasn't all that crazy, although maybe just because I didn't play DraftKings yesterday, I feel mildly removed from some of these ownerships. So I'm looking at who the chalkiest plays on the slate were. Now, I remembered it being Cooper Kupp. That much I can tell you. 33% owned. That chalk smashed. I had no issues getting to Cooper Kupp. Let's just hit on Cooper Kupp quickly, independent of everybody else, because he was 33% owned in the slant. That is 10% more than any other individual play. How were you on Cooper Kupp? As I look at it, you basically just were with the field, 35% on Kupp.
He was my highest owned player, but that still just happened to put me right around the field. It was just, obviously a really, really good spot. It was a game with a really high total. You had Henderson out, which you and I talked about on the show in the morning. I thought there was a really good chance you just saw more passing from the Rams. So I thought Kupp looked good. I thought Higbee looked good. I thought Woods looked good. But overall, Kupp so far this season has really benefited from having Matthew Stafford there. It's been a really, really good fit. So I was fine getting around the field on Kupp. It was at a price point where I didn't think there were, of course there were pivots, but there wasn't a whole lot that stood out as somebody that I thought, was a much better play than Kupp or anything like that. I was fine just getting to a good amount of him.
Yeah, I think that was just sort of a situation where he was good chalk. The price tag worked. The game scenario worked. You didn't go too crazy. I mean, a third of the lineups isn't like a monster number that just made a lot of sense. I understood totally why he was chalk. Yeah, better question then for you is TJ Hawkinson was chalk, 24% owned in the slant, second highest owned player overall. You had 1.3%. He full on busted 3 fantasy points. Do you have any thought process as to why you were so light on Hawkinson? Is this just another case where we're seeing a tight end pick up ownership and you're just simply going to choose the field over one individual tight end?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's just a tight end thing because we've seen that for me personally. I know my exposures have sort of played out that way all season. Like week 1, it was Kyle Pitts where I was just drastically under. I think it's just that, I think Hawkinson was the best out of that group, but they were still so similar. I think I had Hawkinson projected 1 fantasy point higher than whoever the next, Mark Andrews or Pitts, whoever I had next, which really just doesn't matter in the overall scheme of things. And there were so many tight ends in that price range, not to mention Kelsey and Waller, but so many tight ends in that price range where, I get it. Hawkinson is the number 1 receiver essentially for the Lions. He's going to have some monster games, but it's still a spot where I don't think the floor is particularly high. And I think that the range of outcomes for a lot of other players is still really similar at that position.
Yeah, that unquestionably had to help you out quite a bit. It's really fascinating to look at your exposures because Fantasy Cruncher lineup study color codes the column in comparison to how owned your plays are in comparison to the field. And if we just look at your column in order of actual public ownership, neutral on Kupp, bright red for Hawkinson. You were slightly over the field on Chris Godwin. I'd say that worked out pretty well. He went for 19.5. You can't be mad at that performance. And then it's red, white, red, just fade. You were nowhere near a lot of this chalk. Some of that worked out well for you. Alexander Madison, Austin Eckler, some of these guys did end up going, and that's going to happen. You're going to fade a lot of guys that are going to go for 20 fantasy points on a given slate. Is this just another case where it's just that easy to make really good lineups that don't have high ownership?
I think so. I had no idea until right now that I had so little Robert Woods and Alexander Madison. So it certainly wasn't by design. Like, I didn't like them as plays or anything. I guess how it worked out. There were a lot of guys in those price ranges, I guess. Like when I look at my exposures, so talking about Madison, as a 6K running back, I had 30%, almost 30% Chris Carson at 10% ownership compared to Madison. So, I had 24% DeAndre Swift. So I think that you can sort of just see where I went in that price range. Those guys projected similarly. They were lower owned, so I ended up getting there. But it wasn't, by design or anything. I had no idea I was that low.
Yeah, that's just heavy fading across the board there. 4% Woods. Is that one lineup with Madison? Am I reading that correctly? Yes.
Yeah, it's one lineup.
One Alexander Madison lineup. 2 Austin Eckler lineups. Limited on the Titans. I think that makes sense. I assume your defense exposure is going to, generally speaking, look a lot like tight end exposure in that it's going to be hard to be pulling any specific guy out of that spot. It's interesting that it does funnel then to like skipping the chalk at tight end and defense. You're not adjusting for anything like that at those positions individually, are you?
No, just pretty much, trying to get the best projected lineups I can at the lowest ownership I can.
Okay, that makes sense. Just looking back and comparing the ownership on some of these guys to what the ownership was from a 150 max perspective. We've got Kupp in 33% of slant lineups. He is also then the most owned guy in 150 max at 35.5. Nothing too crazy there. Chris Godwin, it takes a pretty sizable jump from 23% up to 26%. Hawkinson is the fade, though. 24% owned in the slant overall, just 20.7% owned from the 150 maxers. So it looks like that's a similar strategy across 150 maxers to be lighter at the individual chalky tight end. Do we look at this differently if Hawkinson goes for 25, or should this be something that we're paying attention to on a week by week basis?
I think it's something that over the course of a season is going to play out this way a lot because we see it year after year. There's a lot of talent at the tight end position, and there's always, or normally there's tight ends in that like 4 to 5K range where you look and you're like, I like this guy's ceiling because he's good, he's involved, he's cheap. Like if you compare him to, the 4K wide receivers or $4,500 wide receivers, the tight ends look better in terms of ceiling, but pretty frequently, or almost always, they're still not the number one option on their team. There's so many ways for them to have bad games. The offense just does horribly. They don't do well. The wide receiver, like in Kyle Pitts' case, Calvin Ridley is the focus, and he doesn't do well. That's normally going to be an issue for any tight end in that price range. Noah Fant has to deal with Sutton. Hawkinson's really the only one that doesn't have to deal with any true number one receiver, and that, is good. But you just get a situation where I think the ceiling's relatively high for a lot of these guys, but the floor is still really low because they're typically not the number one option on their team in the passing game. There's going to be some games where the offense just doesn't score. There's going to be some games where the offense runs a lot. Maybe they get out to a big lead because, there's a defensive touchdown or something, and they're just, running clock a little bit more in the second half than you would expect. They don't give you that same sort of floor that your, typical running back chalk does, or your typical, number one receiver type chalk does.
It's looking like the sharp play du jour didn't totally work out. You did the same thing as the field. Joe Mixon, 12.9% owned in the slant. 150 maxers had him at 19%, 3, 4, 5, 6, seventh most owned play on the slate. Do you have any particular Joe Mixon thoughts? Because he's appearing to be the guy that got the biggest concentration of ownership to the quote unquote sharps.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a good matchup for him, but he's so involved in that offense. I still thought he was a really good play at low ownership. And I mean, that did pan out. He still had, I think, around 20 carries. The issue was that I don't think he had a single reception. I'm not sure if he was even targeted. The Bengals were playing from ahead once. Yeah. The Bengals were playing from ahead that entire game. So that was, I think pretty unfortunate. Where like on the one hand, yeah, it means that Mixon gets carries, but in DFS, especially on a full PPR site, you're not really looking for Joe Mixon to just run it against the Steelers 20 times and call it a day. You would like there to be some passing work in there as well. So, but it's just one of those where he's so involved that from a tournament standpoint, I'm not really that concerned about the matchup because he's still going to get the workload. He's still, if you play that game out 100 times, he's still going to have plenty of really big games just based on how often he touches the ball.
Jeremy Savage with the message. Told y'all Mixon wasn't a good play and Eckler was.
That's not how this works.
Nope. No. I would just looking at this stuff and seeing Mixon get a concentration of ownership for the 150s would make me think I just did this correctly and should have played more Joe Mixon.
Yeah. Not a knock on Eckler. Good play.
Yeah.
He was another one of those where I didn't like, I didn't have much, but it wasn't like I looked at him and was like, oh, I don't like Eckler. It just worked out where I thought there were other running backs like Swift and Mixon and Carson and, those guys at much lower ownership that give you a similar range of outcomes.
Austin Eckler, 17% owned in the slant, 10% owned by 150 maxers.
Yeah, I'm looking at...
Should we have a conversation about this right now, the relationship between Joe Mixon to Austin Eckler? Because I think this is like a very interesting talking point that most people wouldn't get into.
Yeah, sure. And for what it's worth, I have 7, including myself, I have 7 names pulled up of guys that either work here or that I just think are good tournament players. The Austin Eckler ownership across the board, 1.3% for me, 0.7%, 1.3, 1.3, 9.3, 5.3, 13.3.
So let's start here. What do you think's driving that? What's driving Austin Eckler to be so massively or so significantly less owned for 150 maxers and then the opposite for Joe Mixon? What do you think? Because they're not actually separated by all that much ownership. Austin Eckler at 17% for the entire tournament. Joe Mixon at 13. For all intents and purposes, those are the same numbers. There's no difference between 13 and 17. It's slightly more, but you know what I'm saying, I think. Should this be like one of the first things that people are doing from an evaluation standpoint? Like, we have to sort of agree that Joe Mixon was a better play than Austin Eckler based on this data, right?
Well, the really interesting thing is that looking at the ownership projections, Eckler was like the same as Mixon. It looks like Eckler was 11.5%, Mixon was 10.2. So I don't think that's what was driving. I think it's that Mixon was $900 less expensive. So I don't think Mixon was actively a pivot away from Eckler so much as Mixon was being used as a pivot away from like Madison and Barkley, Barkley was $200 more, Madison was $300 less. So I think that's why so many people were getting to Mixon, was we just expected him to be lower owned than Barkley and Madison at that price point. And he was cheaper than Eckler. So, you're getting that pretty similar, same ceiling, give or take, for $900 less.
Barkley, by the way, 18.9% owned overall in the slant, showed up in 15% of the 150 maxers. So we are seeing a very interesting divide at running back. I wonder if it's even more pronounced than that. I'm just sorting now by running backs in general. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was at 19%. More people ended up playing him. That actually worked out well. The 4 highest owned running backs on the slate, Barkley, Edwards-Helaire, Madison, Eckler, all went for 20 fantasy points. Nuts.
Yeah. So there were so many similar running backs yesterday.
Why do I have team total still on there? It's making this look. I kept looking at the team total. I was like, what? Did all of these guys score 20? And I was like, oh, it's a different column altogether. So we've got Barkley at 6,500, Madison at 6K. Eckler is the slightly higher priced guy. So it just seems like people were dropping down a little bit easier. We saw DeAndre Swift be 11% owned overall. He ended up getting to 15%. So it just seems like Eckler is the guy that just took the giant haircut. Eckler and Barkley. So what do you think? What do you think the driver there is? Austin Eckler and Saquon Barkley, two guys picking up, two of the four most owned running backs, but they are the two that take the biggest haircut for the 150 maxers. Do you think there's anything in particular for those two guys that cause that in relationship to the rest of the guys that are taking the bump up?
For Barkley, I think it's ownership compared to the guys around him. So Barkley at 6,500, we had projected at 15%. You had Naji Harris $100 more at basically half the ownership. You had Carson, who was $100 less at like 60% of the ownership. You had Mixon, $200 less, lower owned. And all of those guys projected similarly enough. Even if you thought Barkley was the best play out of the group, the range of outcomes is the same. The projection is very similar. So when you're getting a running back in that range, I think the approach that most 150 max players take is going to be to just get more of those lower owned guys at the expense of Barkley. For Eckler, I don't think it was that any one guy, like anybody was looking and saying, oh, I like this guy more, or this guy is a better play than Eckler. I think it was just that you could get so many of these guys: Harris, Barkley, Carson, Mixon, Madison, Gibson, Swift. You could get all of these guys for like $1,000 or for like $600 or more, less expensive than Eckler, that projected pretty similarly and give you a similar range of outcomes. So when you have ownership going to Eckler at a price point where you can just save money and get similar production for less, I think a lot of people are just going to take that. If Eckler were projected for like 3-4% ownership, I'm sure he would have been popular amongst 150 maxers because it obviously was a good play if you're just talking about Eckler and you're completely ignoring, salary and everything else.
Find it really, really interesting to see. So your highest exposed running back was Chris Carson, Mixon, Swift, Edwards-Helaire, and Naji Harris, all showing up in 18% or more. Any other thoughts here just with regards to those running backs? I thought that's a really fascinating thing to look at.
So Naji Harris, I think, is the perfect example of why this conversation in chat about, Mixon wasn't a good play because he didn't score or whatever is so just wrong, like how you can't look at this. You have the same people. I don't know if it's actually the same people. I wasn't paying close attention, but you have like at the same time, you're going to have people be like, wow, I can't believe Harris caught 14 passes. Like that was so unexpected. Why were people on him? Why did they think that was going to happen? Nobody thought that was going to happen. But everybody knew that he was going to be super involved in the Steelers game plan and be on the field constantly. And when you're on the field constantly and you're touching the ball a lot, it gives you the opportunity for good things to happen. That's all that this is. It's not looking and saying, this is exactly how this game's going to play out. And this guy's going to have success for sure. Like you're just not going to be right that often. It's about putting yourself in positions to have relatively low owned guys that are going to play big roles. And a big reason that you're able to do that is because people spend too much time saying, oh, this is how it's going to play out. I can't play Joe Mixon because he's playing the Steelers. I can't play Naji Harris because I don't know. He didn't do well weeks 1 and 2, whatever. It's just about, understanding that if guys touch the ball, they have the opportunity to do well. And even if you don't like the matchup, you don't like the player or whatever, if they're touching the ball, they're going to do well a lot more often than you're giving them credit for.
We are on the same page there. Quickly, I want to hit on our schedule for today at 1 p.m. Eastern time, the Awesemo betting show on the Awesemo odds channel with Eitan and Ben. You get the Awesemo fantasy football show on the fantasy football channel at 2 p.m. Eitan, Laffy, and Ben. So back-to-back shows with Eitan and Ben. 3 o'clock, you get the Yahoo NFL show with Pete and Eric. 4 p.m., you get PGA Strategy with Eric and Jason. 6:30 p.m., Laffy and Matt Savoca handle the NFL Deeper Dive. And then at 7:30 p.m., NFL Live Before Lock with Eric and Matt Kajeski. We've got MLB player rankings and NFL player rankings free tonight. You've got Cowboys and Eagles going on. Should be fun. Plus, my contenders videos are out, so go check that out. Let's look at wideouts now just for yesterday. Two highest owned wideouts were Cooper Kupp and Chris Godwin. They, I believe, were your two highest owned as well. So it's not like you weren't playing some guys that were getting some ownership. They just happened to be at the wide receiver spots instead of the running back spots.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that I got so much Godwin and Kupp and then like no Woods. I'm guessing it's just that I think I just had a lot higher projection on Kupp and Godwin. And so it just ended up being like, okay, well, I'm going to eat ownership on these guys. I don't want to also add, like Robert Woods in there, even though, again, I thought he was a good play. He, not, I don't want to say he easily could have had the same game as Kupp because I don't think he could have with, the opportunities Kupp got, but there's going to be games over the course of the season. Like Robert Woods is kind of a perfect example of what we were just saying with Naji Harris. He hasn't really had that big game yet. I can almost guarantee at some point over the next few weeks, there's going to be a game where Kupp disappoints and Woods just goes for, like 30 points or something. So it's not that, he couldn't have done the same thing as Kupp, but Kupp did project a lot better. And so I think for me, it's just, I was willing to get to Kupp. I was willing to get to Godwin. They both projected as clear top options in that price range. And then I just went away from a lot of the other popular receivers.
This could have had a little bit to do with it. We had Godwin at 17% projected ownership, came in at 23. We had Woods at 24% at projected ownership, came in at 18. I would imagine you would have less Godwin and more Woods if the actual numbers were what were projected. You're going to bump Godwin by 5%. You're going to cut Woods by 4%. You're just going to get more Woods. These guys are separated by $400.
Yeah, I hadn't even noticed that. So I was just, speculating on why I didn't get as much Woods. I'm sure that had a lot to do with it, that we just had the ownership projections flipped.
Yeah. And the difference between 17 and 23 isn't all that important. Like, we understand where those numbers are, but for these two specific guys next to their salary, flip-flopping those two, it's going to impact your own personal lineups a bit.
Yeah, I'm sure if basically we just had the ownership flipped. I'm sure if we had 17% going to Woods and 24 going to Godwin, I don't know if I get 31% Woods and 4% Godwin, like to the same extreme that I did, but I would definitely have had less Godwin than I ended up with and more Woods.
I'm feeling that they're more in like the 17-17 range.
That's,
and they actually
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Because Godwin's still going to project really well. You still didn't have Antonio Brown. You still had a game where you're expecting a lot of points there, and you still have, Kupp projected better than Woods on his same team.
Woods actually 18% owned, but 22 from the 150 maxer. So he did get that bump. Marvin Jones was fourth. He's also fourth for the 150 maxers. DK Metcalf was fifth. Same situation. This is the one I'm interested in. I haven't looked at it yet. KJ Osborne was the sixth most owned wideout at 14%, 14.9. You were neutral to the field. Oh, excuse me. Okay. Same thing for the 150 maxers. Nothing too crazy there.
Yeah, I don't think there was a ton of sub 4K receivers, especially that weren't getting ownership and that had similar opportunities. Hardman was getting ownership as well, at least to some extent. So, Cephas was projected at 4%. So it made sense, I think, just to get to some Osborne when you needed that price range.
Tight end, we saw Hawkinson get to 24%. Higbee and Pitts were both in the 12s. You did not get to Travis Kelce at all, just one lineup with him. That ended up being not all that meaningful. He had a relatively normal game. Higbee and Andrews. Okay, so Mark Andrews was 8.5% owned. 150 maxers had Andrews at 11, which I think is very interesting. Even Higbee got a bump up quite a bit from 13% to 15 and change. Pitts was the guy that took the haircut. You were pretty neutral on Pitts. And then for Kelce, neutral. Waller was the guy that ended up hurting me. Just 10 fantasy points, 7 targets. Last 2 weeks, 7 targets and 7 targets, 5 catches for both. No TDs, coming off of a week 1 where he had 19. Could have used those 19 targets last week. We did. I saw somebody ask a question before APKS, which just said who had Peyton Barber and Desean Jackson. I'd say 3 or 4 years ago, I would look at guys that had those sorts of scores and be mad that I didn't see it. And now they're irrelevant plays.
Yeah, I think obviously you want those guys in your lineup, but I think you do a lot more damage than good, actively chasing them. Because I was the same way. I spent so much time where it's just oh, well, I'm not getting enough of the 3K guy that is going to somehow break this slate. But you end up just making so many shitty lineups.
There's 45 of them on the slate.
Right.
There's one on every team.
Right. And we had even kind of talked about it. Someone asked the question on our show yesterday about, I think they had asked about Jalen Guyton and Tyler Johnson on the Bucks. And, the answer was kind of using guys like that is fine in a Millie Maker type contest, but even more so, I think it's, if you have their quarterback, it makes some sense. There's certainly a non-zero chance that they just happen to house a 70-yard touchdown, but there's so many good receiver options typically at basically every price point that it's not that hard to make a relatively low owned NFL lineup with just good players and guys that are heavily involved without trying to, guess which guy from which of the 24 teams happens to catch an 80-yard touchdown.
Yeah, like Peyton Barber, just going based on whatever FC has in as the projection. Peyton Barber was projected for 6 fantasy points, 0.8% ownership. Desean Jackson, 4 fantasy points, 1.5% ownership. I mean, for all intents and purposes, these guys shouldn't get owned. Like they probably shouldn't be in lineups. Desean Jackson was in 61 slant lineups. Peyton Barber was in 105. Like that's.
Yeah, like and like the thing with Jackson too, it would be different if Van Jefferson just like weren't a thing, and you knew that Desean Jackson, like if a random receiver on the Rams catches an 80-yard touchdown, it will be Desean Jackson. That would be one thing. Van Jefferson plays that role as well. So you have a guy who like already doesn't get a lot of targets, but then also might not even be the deep threat in that particular game. So like, I understand why Jackson makes sense as a play. And obviously in hindsight, he had a monster game. He was missed on, I think, 2 other deep touchdowns. Like he could have had an absolutely just ridiculous game. But the point is, kind of goes back to, I think there's like a tendency when you look back and you say, oh man, like I should have played some Desean Jackson because this is what Desean Jackson does. But there's a lot of guys where had they caught, 3 balls for 120 and a touchdown, you would say, oh, that's what Jalen Guyton does. That's what, XYZ does. And then suddenly if you're trying to get exposure to all of those guys, you end up making a lot of just really weak lineups for no real reason. Yeah.
Especially someone like Desean Jackson. I think the only way you're getting Jackson is if you have some sort of heavy Ram stack.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's
like
probably
Jackson,
not the only Ram wide receiver in your lineup.
Right. If you're jamming in, like if you're taking a huge stand on the Rams, like I know there's some 150 max players that I think are good that a lot of times when I look at their exposures, they'll have like 50% of one quarterback and they just basically ran a ton of stacks of that team. In that case, by all means, you should be getting to Jefferson, you should be getting to Jackson, you should be getting to Higbee, Higbee, Cup, Woods, obviously. But yeah, you should just be putting yourself in a position where if the Rams score 40 points, you have every single touchdown they scored. Yeah. But if you're not taking that approach and, you only have, let's say 10% Stafford stacks or something, you really shouldn't be allocating a whole lot of that to Desean Jackson. You should be because you don't have enough lineups there.
Yeah. The large majority is going to Woods, Higbee, and Cup in some order. Jackson is along for the ride, maybe. Shout out to Josh Allen for being the highest scorer on the slate, 40.22 fantasy points. You doubled up his ownership. I can't say that I blame you there. I was there as well, not nearly as much as I should have been. He just had an absolute monster day. And then we get to the number 2 scorer overall in the highest position or highest guy that isn't a quarterback, Mike Williams, 36.2 fantasy points. It irritated me every time he got a touch. You had a crisp 0, and he is a guy that like should have been owned and was owned. You were just lighter on the Chargers side, it seems.
Yeah, I wasn't really heavy on that game, which didn't make me feel great, but I think it was just a pricing thing. I thought that there were a lot of really good plays. There were a lot of of guys that projected really well just in the mid-range on this slate. And that's something you and I had talked about on the show in the morning too, that, we kind of talked about like, are there cash game locks? It was like, there's guys that are really good cash plays, but like, it wasn't a slate where there were only a couple of mid-range guys that stood out. There were so many. And so I think that was something that kind of just forced me away from that game where, the Chiefs side was expensive as always. The Charger side, it wasn't expensive necessarily in like, in raw terms, but just like we were talking about with Eckler, he was still more expensive than a lot of running backs that I liked. Keenan Allen was more expensive than a lot of wide receivers that I liked. And so I think that kind of just drove me away from that game, even though obviously it was a good game to target.
I did not want that second touchdown that came in, that much I can tell you. I also didn't realize that Naji Harris ended up with 31.2. I'm really happy about the exposure that I had to him, but that's what's going to happen.
Second touchdown?
The second touchdown for Mike Williams.
Oh, I didn't think I did either, but it helped me on Yahoo, so I'll take it.
That'll work.
So Mike Campbell had asked in chat, and I'll just touch on it quickly.
Go for it.
He asked if I set a max projected ownership for my lineups when I crunch. No, I think that's one reasonable thing you can do. And as a general rule, like fantasy cruncher questions are tough because it all interacts with what else you're doing as part of your process. So like, I can tell you exactly how I make my lineups, but it's not necessarily going to help you because you're probably doing something, different at some point along the way. But that is one reasonable approach for me. I set it so that I have a minimum leverage score. So using like the boom bust tool to get, the chances of success or optimal ownership versus projected ownership. I just want to know that I'm building lineups that are positively leveraged. And then from there, I know I can just, go through and find lineups that project the best and are the lowest owned, and that they're still going to be, solid lineups. So that's how I do it. But using an ownership cap is another reasonable way to do it.
I want to do whatever I can to get as close to what I want coming out of Fantasy Cruncher as possible without sacrificing too much speed. And that, I think, is the big piece for NFL Sundays, because you can get all of that in there, but you might be creating one lineup every 5 seconds based on, setting an ownership cap, maybe a projection cap, whatever other like boosts for stacks and bringbacks and all of that good stuff. You can really slow it down.
The thing you want to be careful of if you're using ownership caps is it's typically going to change by slate. So you don't want to just blindly set the same, 160 max ownership or whatever, because what's going to happen is there's going to be some slates where there's like a really good chalk play that is, 60% owned or something, but he's
Alexander
like
Madison was 4K yesterday.
Right.
And he's 45% owned.
Right.
It's going to, all the previous number that you normally type in there is no longer relevant to this slate.
Right. And what's going to happen if you're not paying attention to that is either you're going to just build a bunch of lineups that don't have the clear top play on the slate, or you're going to get the clear top play and then just have absolute garbage around him because it's not letting you play the other good plays on the slate.
I don't have much else to look at from an individual play perspective here. I think it's time that we take a look at the winning lineups and I guess your lineup as well. 1.12 fantasy points behind top dog 5252. Also a 150 maxer. Do you have any idea who that is?
No.
Do you have like a logo or anything? If he does, don't say what site it was.
Yeah, no, if he did, I don't remember, but no, I didn't recognize the name. Okay. But most of the top of the leaderboard was 150 maxers, I believe.
Yeah, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9, all 150 maxers. Although
eighth is in chat, by the way.
Who's ace?
Eighth.
Gotcha. Yeah, I saw that earlier. Bruh, man, 6'7". I was like, I don't know who ace is. I don't see a single ace name in this thing. All right, so top dog 52 with the lineup. Let's take a look at it, analyze it for a second, and then we can show everybody what you had. Justin Herbert at quarterback, Edwards-Helaire, Naji Harris, DK Metcalf, Jamar Chase, who's been on a tear, Mike Williams, Tyler Higbee, Alexander Madison, Arizona Cardinals. I mean, that's a chalk lineup.
It's a really good lineup.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Like when I say chalk, I don't mean that negatively or anything, but like it's not 2% owned guys that where you just hit everything. Like every one of those plays that I see on the screen were good plays before it. You get the correlation of Herbert and Mike Williams. You get the bring back from Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, I don't see a single thing wrong with it. It just looks like a really good lineup.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't a lineup that I minded, finishing ahead of me. A lot of times, you come in second, you look the lineup in first, and you're like, you've got to be kidding me. But no, it was really, really good lineup.
I would guess that this lineup would be hard for me to get to based on the Cardinals being the defense. I feel like that would end up making this lineup grade out a little bit worse for me, just because of how, I don't want to say highly owned the rest of it was, but like that right there, when I look at it, seems like a very easy pivot point to be more unique. But I'm quibbling.
Yeah, I think that's the piece that I guess I would, and again, not that there's anything wrong with it, but
no,
because I mean, you and I both agree, and we talked about it a lot yesterday, like defenses from a DFS standpoint, I really don't care.
Right.
But yeah, I think that if I built that lineup, you would just see a lower owned defense there to help offset some of the total exposure or total ownership.
Is that higher owned as a lineup than you would have really expected to get to the top here?
No, because I mean, you have to think too about like who it doesn't have. It doesn't have Cooper Kupp, so it doesn't have Godwin. So that's the other thing too that I think kind of gets overlooked when people talk about ownership and lineup ownership and stuff like that. If you don't have a couple of the highest owned players on the slate, that also makes you contrarian. It's not just about what's in your lineup. So, so here, like, yeah, he's got a bunch of guys that are, give or take 10% owned, a little higher, a little bit lower. He doesn't have any, 1% owned guys that are a key, but he also doesn't have 30% owned guys. And so, the idea would be, and obviously it didn't really work out, at least in the case of Kupp, but like, he doesn't have Hawkinson. He doesn't have Kupp. Hawkinson had a horrible game, so that gives him a huge advantage. If Kupp had a poor game, he would have had an even easier time winning this. So not having, like when you look at my lineup, I have a couple of guys that are, sub 5%, but I also felt, when I build my lineups, I need that because I do have the 33% of the Kupp. So I need to put myself in a position where I'm different, even if Kupp does well. So like, I think that makes a big difference is whether or not you have those highest owned guys on the slate.
So both you and Top Dog were similar in this respect. He had a total projected ownership of 86%. Yours was 76%. And I don't pay too close attention to the sum of ownership. I'm more of a product guy. That's neither here nor there. His actual ownership ended up being like 25 points higher than it really was, where yours was basically spot on. He saw the big jump there. So I do find that interesting. I
missed what you said at the.
So Top Dog's projected ownership for his lineup was 86%. It actually came in at 111.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yours was 76%. So you two were very close pre-lock. Post-lock, yours was the same. It was still at that basically like 80% number. So that is a really interesting piece to see for the way that you're building out a lineup. I've got yours pulled up now. Josh Allen.
I didn't know. I hadn't gone back to look. I was really hoping I'd use the full 50K because Gibson's only $100 less than Madison.
Well, we could talk about Gibson too, as two football team fans. Josh Allen, Antonio Gibson, Naji Harris, Cole Beasley, Cooper Kupp, Manuel Sanders, Mark Andrews, Justin Jefferson, and then the non-owned defense, 0.4% on the Chargers against the Chiefs. I love the Josh Allen stack with Beasley and Sanders. I had a ton of Beasley on Yahoo. I had very little Sanders. He was a little bit more expensive. So every time that Sanders kept doing, like I felt like Beasley was involved every time Josh Allen dropped back, and then every single touchdown was just not involving Beasley at all.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter for Yahoo, but he also finished at 98 yards.
Yeah, also not ideal. Gibson, the product of one gigantic play for reasons undetermined to me. He only had one other target.
Yeah, but don't know, don't get it. Yeah, I mean, Gibson, as far as the score goes, it was insanely lucky. Just housed a screen pass for 73 yards. That was basically all he did on the entire day. Washington got completely steamrolled, but doesn't really matter. Still worked out.
T.O. Deck, why doesn't FC allow us to do this with FanDuel? You've got that question asked incorrectly. Why doesn't FanDuel allow this for anyone else? FanDuel does not allow any of their data to get out. So that's why this happens. DraftKings has CSVs that you can export, means the data is available to everybody. FanDuel does not have that same ability. So don't be mad at Fantasy Cruncher. Be mad at FanDuel. Your lineup looks good. I don't have anything to say. I have a feeling that if you looked at this specifically, you would individually swap the Chargers defense into someone else at 2,500 or less. But like, that's not how you're looking at 150 lineups.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, I would have never, if I were hand building 150, I don't think I get to the Chargers. But even that, I mean, not that like, again, not that I thought the Chargers were any sort of good play or anything. But when you think about the lineup, from like just an overall theory standpoint, if you don't have the Chiefs or the Chargers game, you're kind of hoping that some weird stuff happens and that, it's lower scoring, or at least the points are coming from somewhere else. So I guess my point here, not only, does that Chargers piece does at least negatively correlate to one of the more popular games. But one thing I think doesn't get talked about enough with defenses, and it goes back to what you and I were saying yesterday too, about how the scoring for defenses doesn't have a whole lot to do with giving up, or not giving up fantasy points. It has to do with turnovers and most importantly, touchdowns. I think a lot of times over the course of a season, you get opportunities where there's a decent defense in a really bad matchup. And so they're priced down. They're also not getting any ownership. A defense that's facing a team that's going to throw the ball a lot has a higher ceiling than a defense facing like a bad offense that's just going to run the ball a lot. Like if you're facing a bad offense that like just doesn't trust their quarterback, yes, when that quarterback throws, he's going to make more mistakes than somebody like Patrick Mahomes. But a lot of times that offense is just going to run the ball and run like little short, safe passes. Whereas somebody like Mahomes is going to drop back a lot, and you can pick up sacks. He's going to throw the ball in the coverage. It gives you the opportunity to get an reception. So, again, I'm not making the case the Chargers are any sort of great play, but I do think just as a general rule on DFS defenses, one spot that really does go overlooked a lot is the good defense in a really bad matchup that's also cheap and low owned. If you're facing a quarterback that's going to throw a lot, you have a high ceiling at defense.
And you mentioned it out of the gate there, but this lineup, and obviously it wasn't going to, I don't think you're changing that setting, but you don't have Kelsey highly owned or mildly owned. You don't have Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the lineup, mildly owned. You don't have Tyreek Hill in the lineup, mildly owned. Now, you're never going to have those guys and the Chargers D, at least not on purpose. You're probably not changing it. But when you don't have all of those guys, it just immediately gives a correlative boost to the Chargers defense by default. So it makes sense in this lineup. And I'm only pointing it out just because when you see it, it's like, oh, Chargers defense, 2,300 unowned against the Chiefs. You probably don't pick that one if you're building it by hand, but worked out 10 points. If you're not going to be spending all that much salary on a defense, if you get 10 points back from the D, you're more than okay with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just even when you look in that price range, right? The Bengals who I actually ended up with tons of, which I wasn't real thrilled about, but that's a completely different issue. The Bengals were 18% owned at 2,100. You have the Chargers sub 1% at 2,300. Yes, clearly the Bengals were in a better spot. They were a better play and all of that. They're not beating the Chargers. You wouldn't take 18-1 odds on the Bengals versus the Chargers.
You wouldn't take 18-1 odds on any single defense you want to pick against the worst defense that's available. That's just not how defense is going to work. They don't even have to be good for it to work. That's where it's like the really weird. You can get smacked, but you can luck into 2 touchdowns, and all of a sudden your right is rain.
Right. The Titans were 17% owned at 2,400. They scored 7 points less than the Chargers. There's so much volatility at defense because of the way that the scoring is.
Here's one thing I know that we haven't looked at in the first 2 shows, but I want to look at it now. I'm pulling up just on my end, at least right now, just to talk about what you needed. What were the keys to being at the top? So the top 1% of entries, you had to finish in the top 522 spots. Cooper Kupp in the top 522 lineups was 73% owned. So you can get a 1% lineup without Cooper Kupp, as you're well aware. But 73% owned. Godwin was second at 52. Higbee was third at 41. And then you get into Madison, Edwards-Helaire, Mike Williams in the 30s. But the Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee combo was going to help you get towards the top. Josh Allen and Matt Stafford, the 2 most owned quarterbacks in the top 1%. But value at running back was there. Madison and Helaire, Swift, Naji Harris, just not a lot of pay up option at running back. And then if you wanted to get in the top for defense, the Cardinals were the play 31% of the time. Bengals at 25%. Bengals got to 13, or Browns got to 13, and then everything else is single digits. A lot of Tyler Higbee, though. Could have used that the week before. Didn't work out all that well for me.
Yeah, that would have been nice too. But I played him in cash instead of Hawkinson, so that helped.
I'm going to pull up Yahoo on my side. Jordan, you don't have to worry about pulling this up right now. I do want to just give everybody what you had as your Yahoo lineup. So it wasn't just a second place finish on DraftKings in the slant. Adam also finished third in the Yahoo Baller, which, as we mentioned, it was unquestionably the best contest you can get into. I assume that's going to be the case. Again, they got 39,000 of 50,000 entries. So 39,131 at $20 an entry is 782,000 brought in for a $1 million prize pool. I'm going to assume that they have a $1 million prize pool again next week. Maybe they bump the entry fee to 25 and start to cut it down a little bit. But this contest, if it has $1 million prize pool next week, is going to overlay again, and you should be getting into it. Just want to make sure that we keep beating that drum because it's very, very legitimate for everyone. All right, I'm clicking on you. It's loading now. I've got my why does it show this lineup against you? Why wouldn't you just show me my best lineup against your best lineup?
Don't get me started on this. So I actually late swapped on this team because I realized I happened to see it was doing really, really well. And I had, I think, like Metcalf and Fournette to go. And so I switched it to Kupp and Madison. But like, it's so hard to even do that on Yahoo because the layout is just so bad. You're muted or your connection is out or both. I don't really know. Can't hear you. I cannot hear you.
I can't hear any of you right now.
Now I can hear you.
Now I can hear you. Okay, so that was me, I guess?
It wasn't me.
Fair. Easy, Shaggy. So something about a late swap.
What? You couldn't hear me?
No.
I was just saying that like I late swapped to Cup and Madison on my team that came in third because I happened to see it was doing well, but that it's so hard to even gauge your teams and what they're doing, to see where you should be, kind of optimizing.
Yeah, you can't really do anything in the app. You have no idea which lineups are individually any good. The website is still a little bit better, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, your lineup on Yahoo: Justin Herbert, Antonio Gibson, Naji Harris, Mike Williams, Chase Claypool, Cooper Kupp, Travis Kelce, Alexander Madison, Saints D. That's the biggie. Gets you the 20 additional points and all the way to third.
Yeah. Random defense, scored a bunch of points at low ownership. It's kind of one of the easiest ways to jump up leaderboards.
I don't even know how to find my best Yahoo lineup.
Go to standings and start scrolling.
Yeah, I don't even think that's it. Now I'm looking for all right, it's got to be this one. This is the one that finished 348. Critique my lineup. Let me know what you think. Mahomes, Gibson, Madison, Mike Williams, Hardman, Metcalf, Fant, Kupp, Broncos D.
So Hardman's the only Chiefs guy, right?
Yeah.
Kind of don't love that. I mean, it's okay. Obviously, you certainly are going to get some games where Hardman scores, but on that particular team, I think it's normally Hardman has a good game and so does Kelce or so does Hill. When Hardman has a good game, I think typically it just means the Chiefs scored 5 touchdowns. I don't think there's a lot of games where it's just Mahomes to Hardman 3 times and Kelce and Hill get shut out or anything.
So Hardman was $11. Obviously Kelce and Hill were both pretty aggressively expensive. I don't hate it so much in the, if Mahomes gets in on the ground, if we're keeping Hill and Kelce out of the end zone, Mahomes can have a pretty big day without getting there on the big salaries for someone like Tyreek Hill and Kelce. It allowed me to, I don't know. I mean, ultimately Noah Fant getting 3 targets for 2 catches and 15 yards is what submarine this lineup. He had 2.5 fantasy points. Got enough, I guess, out of Hardman at $11. You would like a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I do wish that it had another Chief in some way.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of think of it if paying up at quarterback ends up being optimal, Mahomes, smashes Allen and all the other guys, then chances are the main pieces on the Chiefs, at one of them at least, paid off.
Here's a question for you. Is this a lineup that you could have gotten to? Would you have had something set up so that you would have definitely had not just Hardman? Or could this possibly have been generated for you?
Yeah, I'm actually not positive. I don't know if Hardman would have made my cutoff for my because I build some two receivers with 1 run back, 2 with none, 1 with 1. So I definitely could have gotten there from that standpoint. But I'm not sure if Hardman. I don't know where Hardman's projection was relative to what I had set it at.
He was 8% owned.
Okay, yeah. I mean, because I use raw points when I do it. So when I set the group, so I just don't know. I don't remember what number I used or what Hardman's raw projection was. If I would have had I basically just don't know if my Kansas City 1-man stack group was if Mahomes, then you must use one of Kelce or Hill, or if it was Kelce, Hill, Hardman.
Gotcha. All right, that works. Kudos to Chris, whoever won for the 100K in the live final entry. It's a fun slate. It ground my gears at first. I thought it was going to be a good day. It ultimately was not. Post-contest analysis. Perfect lineup on Yahoo. Are you ready?
Yeah, actually have it up.
Yeah. Josh Allen, Kareem Hunt, James Robinson, Emmanuel Sanders, Mike Williams, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Conklin, Peyton Barber, Arizona Cardinals.
Left $14 on the table.
Oh, man. Best submitted lineup, so I assume that's just the winner. Allen, Edwards-Helaire, Naji Harris, Sanders, Beasley, Mike Williams, Travis Kelce, Cooper Kupp, Saints D. I could have very easily had that lineup.
Yep.
Other than Saints D being a random number generator for me, as far as
right. Yeah, that was totally random.
Yeah. Anything else you think that we should touch on for week 3?
I think it's worth mentioning that the Allen, Sanders, Beasley, Bill stack, that also kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the winning lineup in the slant, where what isn't in your lineup also plays a role. Obviously, if you're stacking the Bills, you're going to want a lot of Allen Diggs, Allen Diggs Sanders, Allen Diggs Beasley, but Diggs is the main piece. But that's going to be the case for a very large percentage of Bill stacks. So if the Bills go off, like if you stack the Bills and you're right, and they go off, if it's the Diggs route, you're still going to be competing with a lot of teams. Whereas it's easier to win if it happens to be, the Sanders Beasley route. But there's only so many teams you can do that with too. Like the Bills clearly are one of them. Beasley's very involved. Sanders is very involved. You're going to have some games like yesterday where Diggs is pedestrian and those guys have big games. But like when you look at a team like Washington, if you're running like a 2-man Washington stack, it's really tough to say like, oh, let's go Heineke plus De'Ami Brown plus Logan Thomas and, ignore Terry McLaurin and Antonio Gibson and McKissick. So it's really team dependent. And I'm not saying you should just go start jamming in a bunch of like quarterback plus wide receiver 2 plus wide receiver 3 stacks. But that's another, I just thought it was an interesting example where even within those Bill stacks, that was a very contrarian Bill stack. And that's why, I'm sure most of my Bill stacks were Allen Diggs, some combination of that, but it just makes it's so easy to win with that when it plays out that way, because amongst the Bill stacks, it was, I'm sure, very low.
I think we could look at that. Let me think about this here. So if I put quarterback here, Josh Allen. Nah, maybe I can't. There should be a way to see that, right? I guess not. You can't get that sort of detail. I wanted to see like what the breakdown was for stacks. I can't do that on the fly as quickly as I want to, but ultimately we are at the end of the show. That's going to do it. We're going to turn this one over to nobody. We don't have anything going on for an hour. Awesemo Odds betting show is going to be coming up at 1 p.m. By the way, shout out to No House Advantage for being the presenting sponsor of this show. Make sure you're using that promo code Awesemo. Get yourself a little bit of a deposit bonus when you sign up. All new users get a $25 deposit bonus when they use the promo code Awesemo. All righty. That's all I got. Just all this coach speak stuff. Chucky said they were going to get Barber involved instead of
you
Drake.
guys are setting yourself up for a world of pain over the course of a season if you start going off what coaches say.
Also, yeah, it's Desean Jackson had 3 catches.
Stafford missed him deep twice. Like Jackson legitimately could have scored like 50 points yesterday.
Yeah, but for all intents and purposes, that's going to be Desean Jackson's game every time he steps on the field. Like we're not expecting Desean Jackson to get there based on 13 targets for 11 catches. Like you're just hoping that he catches a 60-yard touchdown. Right.
Getting Desean Jackson more work. It's not like they were like, yeah, we're going to slide him in place of Kupp and Kupp's going to, chill today.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, he's going to run, a few more routes, probably at the expense of Van Jefferson. It's like, obviously I view most coach speak like, if I'm on the fence about a player, like talking about guys like Jackson and Barber, like guys like that, if there's something about them that I like where I'm just like, man, I kind of want to roster them. And then the coach comes out and it's just like, we're going to try and use them more. Then that makes me more confident, I'll use them. But typically when you're talking about like the 4th string wide receiver or, the backup running back or something like that, you're not going to go from like not liking them, not thinking they're a play to like actively investing in them. Because typically, even if they get quote unquote more work, you're not talking about enough to make a real big difference in DFS.
I assume you weren't expecting Peyton Barber to get 23 carries and to out-touch Kenyon Drake 26-11.
No, and for what it's worth, I don't know how it played out. I don't even remember how it played out 2 weeks ago. But Gruden said that about Barber. Like as soon as Jacobs got hurt, he was asked about Kenyon Drake's like what Jacobs' injury means for Kenyon Drake, and he was just like, "I'm really excited to get Peyton Barber more touches." And I don't even know how it went that week, but I know his name wasn't brought up last Monday. So I'm guessing that coach speak didn't work out, but then yesterday it did.
Yeah, no, Peyton Barber was in 105 lineups. Kenyon Drake was in 2,000. So
wait, what? So you took Fournette though before your late swap. That's coach speak. No, it was Fournette's projection. I have no idea what, if anything, was said about Fournette this week.
Yeah. Nor did you know that Fournette happened to be in that particular lineup.
Yeah, he was just a guy in my player pool that ended up in that lineup.
Yeah. Peyton Barber getting 23 carries yesterday is not at all what any single person was expecting. Like, I mean, where's Peyton Barber at here? Let's see. Peyton Barber. 105 lineups in the slant. The highest anybody finished with Peyton Barber was 552nd, which makes a ton of sense to me. Like, he wasn't going to get played. He's not going to make it into the top section because it's not a good play.
Yeah, I mean, he had 13 carries. Like, he had more carries than Drake week 2 as well. But you're still assuming it's going to be some sort of split there.
Yeah. And Drake also still had 6 targets in both of these weeks.
Right.
You're not expecting 23 to 8 on the running plays. You're just expecting something a little bit flatter. Anyway, that'll do it, everybody. Adam, once again, congratulations to you for week 3. Nice to see, not necessarily W's. We need to find a term for like what it is when you finish second or third, because like you don't feel like you binked the tournament, but it's obviously like an immense success. We need a term for that.
Yeah. It's really frustrating and like feels really good at the same time.
Congrats on being highly, highly profitable for week 3. Adam and I will not be back next Monday. You will not be here for this show, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So it's going to get a lot better. Maybe we'll get lucky and it'll be just me walking through all of this. We shall see. But either way, thank you guys for joining us. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, notification bell, all that good stuff. Got a ton of content coming up for the rest of the day, so make sure you're paying attention to that.